So I was quite surprised the other day. I heard that this couple were planning to name their child something original name, and they consulted with a rabbi ostensibly. I have to tell you that that word has been cheapened a lot. Consulted with someone who told them they're not allowed. It is not right for them to name a child an original name. That's not something you do. It's perhaps there are poskim who say you shouldn't do such a thing. I also know that I heard about a couple that did years ago name their child a name that was quite original. I thought it was quite nice, and uh, there are others, I guess, the extremists who told them no, they did something really wrong. You can't do a thing like that. It involved the theophoric suffix, by the way, ends with part of the four-letter name. So there's something wrong with that. You have to. The joke is theophoric names. Oh, well, normally, what's theophoric means when you add part of God's name. You use Aleph Lamed or Yod Hey at the beginning or at the end. Or the examples: El Hanan, Hananel, Yehochanan, or Hananya. Now, no one says Hanan Ka or Kel Hanan. You don't do that. Or Keli Kahu. That's the usual joke. But people believe that if you have an original name, like instead of Hananya, like Gemalia, okay, God has done something good for me, they'd say Gemalka. Oh, you can't say that. You can also say Gemalia or Yehogamal. That would be terrible. You can have Yehoshaphat and Yehoasaph and Yehoash and all these other ones, but you can't do that. Nothing new. Somehow it's forbidden. And I'm sorry, but there is no such halacha. There is an idea that's mentioned in the Medrash a few times, and I guess sometimes it's a little bit more of a richus. It talks about how the forefathers used to name children based on what had occurred to them. They had more of an inspiration. I'll read you what it says in Bereshis Rabbah over here, so you can understand where the mistake is made. By the mistake, it's the Tafasta Meruba mistake. Tafasta Meruba means you have grabbed too much. That means you've looked at a source and you've tried to over apply it. So we'll give a few examples, but first we'll read it. It says, Ul Aver Yulad Shnevanim. Oh, we mentioned Aver before. Shema Achad Peleg, Ki V'Yamau Niflacha Ha'aretz. They say basically, Aver named his son Peleg because in the days of Peleg, that's when the world was divided. Now it's interesting, basically Aver is naming his son concerning something that is going to happen in his son's life. So they say it must have been Aver was a prophet, because he knows about the future. Secondly, Aver is using his divine inspiration to give the child an appropriate name for something historical that is happening. So Rabbi Yossi says, "Harishonim ha'idei shayu makirim yachasehem hayu motziim l'shem hamirah." The earlier generations, they knew what was going on. They knew relationships between things. They understood God's hand in creation and in history. So they mentioned what was going on when they named children. Aval anu she'ein anu yodiim et yachasenu. We don't really understand these things. We don't have a good relationship with them. Anu motzim l'shem avotenu. We just use tried and true ancestral names. No one, very few people have original Jewish names. We just use the usual Hebrew, sometimes Aramaic, sometimes Yiddish, the names that people have been using until this point. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer. By the way, who is Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel? If it's referring to the second one, okay, there was Rabban Gamliel the first, and his father, by the way, was a Shimon. That was Shimon ben Hillel, about whom not much is mentioned. There was a Rashbag. The first was in second temple times, and he was actually one of the Asara Harurei Malchuth. He was executed by the Romans around the time of the Churban. And then his son was Rabban Gamliel of Yavne, the second Rabban Gamliel, not the one called the elder. The first Rabban Gamliel is the elder, the one who's mentioned doing things in the Beis Hamikdash. And then there was Rashbag the second, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel the second, who was around at the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt, and also, I guess, had a really hard time with the Romans because of that. He was Rabbi Yudassi's father. So Rashbag here is apparently the second one, because he's mentioned with Rabbi Yossi. He says, "Harishonim ha'idei shayu mishtamshim beruach hakodesh hayu motzim l'shem ha'meorah." The earlier generations, they used to understand things through divine inspiration. So they named based on events in their lives. Examples, they give Moshe Rabbeinu, Yosef. They named their children based on things that are going on in their lives, right? And it says, Anu, hold on a second. Aval anu she'ein anu mishtamshim b'ruach hakodesh anu motziin l'shem avotenu. We don't really have such divine inspiration, so we just use tried and true Jewish names. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chalafta. It says here, Navi Gadol Haya Aver Shotzi L'Shem Morel. Shows you how big a prophet Aver was because he named his child on something that was going to happen. All the others named their children on what was happening or what had happened to them. Even Moshe Rabbeinu, a great prophet, named his children after what he had been through. Same thing with Yosef, not about what would happen. Okay, so what is there any halacha from here? No, this is a medrash. They're just telling you facts. We don't name like this. And by the way, Rabbi Gamliel, it's interesting. Perhaps Rabbi Gamliel is talking very limitedly about his own family. Why? Like I just mentioned, Hillel's son was Shimon. His son was Gamliel. His son was Shimon. His son was Gamliel. His son was Shimon. His son was, oh, surprise, Yehuda. But his sons were Shimon and Gamliel. And I forgot which one became Nasi after him, but then it became every second generation you have a Yehuda. So Rabbi Gamliel might not be talking necessarily about Jews on the whole. It seems more likely if I were not being Tofes Baruba, trying to learn too much from this particular teaching, I would say that he's just referring to his own family, which actually did this a lot. They would name after their ancestors. Okay? So that's what he's saying. We don't have inspiration, so we stick to that. And by the way, you could say, well, if the Nasi himself is mentioning his family wasn't inspired enough to come up with original names, so maybe we should also. Maybe. Okay, but this is not nisht kain halacha. Or are you saying he's just mentioning a fact? Once again, in the olden days, they were more divinely inspired, so they came up with new names. But we're not so divinely inspired, so we don't do that anymore. Okay, who's to know? Maybe we are getting divinely inspired, new generation. But this certainly is not halacha. The Tofes Beruba position is this is halacha, and therefore, 1, you should not be coming up with any new Jewish names. 2, you should be naming after ancestral names. That's what you should be doing. Okay. By the way, this is what most people do. But thank God you start having large families. You run out of people after whom to call. Remember, growth, assuming nothing tragic really happens, you keep the Torah and you don't suffer these things, and you become as numerous as the sand on the seashore and the stars in the sky. What happens? It's easy. You can name the first few kids after ancestors, but then you have to come up with some new names, or just bring some new names into the family. Yeah, so you should get to that part. You should get to that point and have to be able to come up with new names. By the way, it's a tfisa meruba to lama davar doma. We saw that there's also this is a halacha that the Rambam doesn't bring, but based on that Gemara in Eruvin about the women who there was a town that's Rifin, like the standalone houses in the middle of nowhere, so they didn't have a convenient mikveh. So what they have to do, the women had to travel far to get to the mikveh, and that led to problems. And basically everybody knew when they're going to mikveh. The question is, if you just read it like Rashi, it's just an issue that there was too much exposure. They leave themselves vulnerable to all sorts of things by having to go far away from home. The house vulnerable, they become vulnerable by going to the mikveh. But many saw this as just that the lack of tznius, that people know when they're going for mikveh for obvious purposes, like because I'll say everybody knows what a wedding's all about, what's to happen to the kala, but only a fool actually talks about it. So too, people know about these things. Perhaps they should know about it, and it actually became an issue among many halachic writers that there's a precedent that women should do all they can to conceal, to be very discreet about when they're going to mikveh. There's a lot of different opinions in the Achronim about this. Is it an actual requirement? No. You're not going to find in the Mishnah Torah, for example, that a woman should be so mustar. Rabbi Ostrov pointed out, I was just reading something he wrote on this issue. He mentioned that the Shulchan Aruch still assumed, like the Talmud, that basically people would know, at least the other women know, when women go to mikveh. Why? When a woman was a nida, she dressed differently. She behaved differently. She didn't go to knead the dough and bake it with everybody else because of the challah issue, contaminating the challah. And she didn't do a lot of things. Maybe sometimes she didn't go to Beis Knesset. She definitely wore different clothing, let's say. By the way, we'll need to do this when we have the temple back, because you want to keep kachim and stuff away from people who are contaminated. And once she had been to the mikveh, the next morning she's dressed like normal again. So the other women would know when she's going to the mikveh. And obviously, the people running the mikveh know about this. There is a certain sense. And It's also brought in the Shulchan Aruch that the Shulchan Aruch mentions that a woman has a chazaka that she's a nida. Why? Because the other women know that she started wearing nida clothes, and then they knew that she put on her regular clothes. Also, it talks about srach bita. That is, a woman is supposed to be educating her own daughters in how to keep the laws of nida at home before they grow up. And how do they do that? By learning from their mother, a passive learning, but also an active learning. They see what their mother does. So obviously, the girls are supposed to understand what's going on when their mother goes to mikvah, and why their mother goes to mikvah, and how she prepares for such things, and what is she doing when she's in nida. So it's not exactly the most secretive thing. Okay? It's a new idea. Either way, my father-in-law used to say this, and I think that he was being Toves Meruba. There is a case, I forget the exact name, I didn't find it today, of the great personality who ended up in some other place where these Jews were not secretive about when the women are going to make. As a matter of fact, they used to announce a big shkoyach and a mazel tov, mabruk, and congratulations in the synagogue about Ploni, whose wife went to mikveh this week, or is to go to mikveh, went to mikveh today. Right? They're very proud that they're going to mikveh. And he basically put a stop to this. He had some influence there. They respected his halachic opinion. He made them stop doing this type of thing. But it had, he thought it was lacking in propriety. It's not the modest thing to do. But what happened when they stopped doing this? So people felt less excited about actually going to make fun. Then the women slacked off from their observance of Taras and Mishpacha. They weren't going to mikvahs enough. So the lesson he learned is, at least my father-in-law, the way he said it was, don't try to disabuse anybody of anything. Don't go and start educating a community. He's talking about you YU people. I think you got it wrong. I didn't go to YU, but maybe if he had known about Rabbi Barachim, then he would have said, you Machon Shilo people, whatever it might be. Okay? Don't try to tell people otherwise. Just let people continue doing what they're doing and don't mess with their practice. Don't try to educate them in any way. So I don't believe that's correct. If people were doing something actually wrong, it's good to educate them. It's always good to educate people and bring more Torah to them. The problem here was that this personality basically imposed his own chumrah on this community. They didn't do anything actually wrong. There is no straight halacha that women should keep their mikveh night private or secretive. The Ramah brings such an idea, but it's not a Talmudic idea explicitly, and perhaps saying it should be allowed. So he imposed his own chumrah. Do not impose your own chumrah on others because you could hurt their Torah. But it doesn't. It's not about say not educating people about what they don't know. If you can bring a Jewish community where they're lax in observance of, let's say, Shabbos and Kashrus, or let's say Mora Hamikdash, if you can get people back into that, Ma Tova Manayim, you should be doing that. So there you go. So back to this. We have the example in front of us is trying to say that there's something inherently wrong or forbidden with telling people, no, don't come up with new Jewish names, is a tefisa miruba in this particular sugya. Well, that Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yossi is telling us that people used to be more creative and more inspired, and nowadays we're not so much. But it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with giving a nice new Jewish name, or perhaps something relevant to one's children based on what one has experienced.